Hi, I'm Dr. B, psychiatric nurse practitioner. I'm talking to you today about the number one most important thing in raising children. I'm often asked parenting advice, maybe because I have 7 children, maybe because of the degrees that I have, maybe because people think I have it all together after raising 7 children. My children might actually disagree with you, but we'll just go with it. Let's start with common advice in raising children. We talk a lot about discipline, authority, respect. If people just discipline their children, they will grow up to be okay. If we protect our children, they will grow up to be okay. If we give them experiences, they'll grow up to be okay. There's tons of parenting styles, tons of parenting books that will give you different types of advice, sometimes conflicting each other. But you can take those and adopt what works for you and your family, but remember that all kids are different and stop focusing on being the perfect parent. There are plenty of perfect parents out there, but none of them actually have children, right? So we talk about that. We talk about people that point, oh, my kid would never do that or this and that. I can honestly say before I had children, I was probably more confident in my parenting style. But as you raise 7 children, you realize you make lots of mistakes, and you have to continue to forgive yourself for those. Even if you have successfully raised children, your techniques might not work for all children. So, having grace on other people as they raise their children. You will make mistakes. You have made mistakes, but if you have a relationship with your child, they will forgive you. Hopefully. I have gone back and asked my grown children for forgiveness for several things that we did in raising them. And again, forgiving yourself. So I challenge you to focus on a relationship with your child. And so that the number one thing there is that the child actually feels loved. So of course we love our children. We love our children more than anything. It's the number one strongest love. But that doesn't mean your child actually feels loved. So one of the best books that I've read in this area is by Gary Chapman about the 5 love languages. And I read this early as the kids were young, and one of my daughters actually has the love language of gifts. And if you were to rank my love languages, gifts would be at the very bottom, because I believe that if you need a gift to feel loved, that's kind of materialistic. But for my daughter, she really needs that. She needs to feel, she feels loved by receiving gifts and also giving gifts. The other thing is touch. So we laugh about this. We have two of our children. One of them loved to be touched and the other one hated to be touched. And the one that loved to be touched would follow her brother around wanting a hug like every 15, 20 minutes. And we had to allow him to set some boundaries that he didn't want to be touched all the time. But we also had to allow the one that needed to feel touch to receive that from her brother. So we had this 1 hug a day rule. So he would have to give her a hug 1 time a day, and then she would have to leave him alone. And so they both, he was able to have his boundaries and she was able to feel love. And we still joke about that today. Also being careful with discipline, physical discipline, if their love language is touch. If you're using physical discipline and their love language is touch, it may be perceived as feeling unloved. So then the second thing, so first thing is that they feel loved. The second is that they feel valued, praise and purpose, positive reinforcement, and not comparing children. Every child has a different value place in the family. Especially that middle child. We talk a lot about middle children, and just making sure that we find their purpose and their praise in the midst of a family. And then the last is that they feel heard. So we do choice mapping with children as young as 3 years old, and a common theme that comes up is that they do not feel heard by their family. And so stop and listen to what your child is saying. And I find this very difficult. My brain is going a million miles a minute. I am multitasking. To stop and talk to a child seems childish, right? What they're trying to communicate seems like a waste of time in your busy mind. But taking that time to stop and listen, because it's super important to them to feel heard and to empathize with them, that they're not your child. They're a gift for you to develop. And so focus on that relationship and developing it. And stop the black and white thinking, right? The earlier that we have a relationship with our child, the easier the relationship as a teen will be. We could do a whole video series on relationships with your teen, but again, it starts early. And the challenge with teenagers often comes up because there is, as they develop into individual, there's kind of a conflict maybe in the individual family and cultural beliefs. And so again, challenging you to have a relationship that is mutual, that you can discuss these things and allow them to develop their belief system. I can honestly say we made so many mistakes, especially with our children that we adopted. We truly believe that our education and just loving them would develop them. If you've read our personal story, we do have a book, Against All Odds We Choose. You'll see that a lot of what we did backfired. We did a lot of discipline and trying to set boundaries and discipline. We just thought, if we do this, they will develop into the individual that they are supposed to develop into. And it really backfired. We had a very, very difficult teen and young adult life with some of our adopted children. So again, number one thing is relationships. So when you're struggling, you're having doubts about what you should do next, or stop and think, what is going to improve my relationship with my child? And sometimes that's working on ourselves, and we do that with choice mapping. And I often map myself and I work through things. And sometimes it does go back to how you were parented. So I think about my relationship with my mother. We had a very strong relationship, but it was somewhat enmeshed. But I did feel loved. And I'm not quite sure why I felt loved, probably just from that relationship. It wasn't specifically anything that she did. So I thought that if I just loved my teen girls, we would be able to get through some of these things. And like I said, I'm still working on that relationship as they're in their 20s now. My adopted dad was opposite. He was more about authority, and I didn't have a relationship with him at all until now as adults. We have a pretty good relationship, but I did not feel loved as a child. And then unfortunately, if you're mapping things and you have actual trauma in your childhood and you were traumatized by your parent, you have to break that cycle. There's in working through that trauma with choice mapping or another professional, but you have to break that cycle so that it's not put onto your children. And again, I think I've said it about 10 times, the most important thing is a relationship. And if you want to better understand developing a relationship with your child, in the description box below, you can click the link and download our Choice Opportunity worksheet called Parenting with Relationship. So thank you for watching. If you know someone who could benefit from this information, please share it with them. Like, comment, subscribe, and remember, you are mentally strong.